Peter Baelish sat upon the Iron Throne with a quiet confidence that few had expected to see in a lord they once deemed an upjumped master of coin. The seat of swords was as uncomfortable as ever, sharp edges protruded from ancient steel like the buried bones of dead kings, but Littlefinger wore his new station with the practiced ease of a man who had long dreamt of this moment. The grandeur of the Red Keep seemed to shift around him, shifting as if to adjust itself to his presence, or perhaps he adjusted to it with subtlety and skill. The scattered lords and ladies who watched him from the throne room's floor could sense it, the aura of a man who believed he had the right to rule the 7 kingdoms. No heralds announced his name with undue pomp, there was no need. Everyone present understood who he was and how precarious their futures might be if they misjudged him. Silent but for the shuffle of feet and the rustle of fine silks, courtiers fidgeted, anxious to see how this new era would unfold. Peter Baelish, once the lord of a modest piece of land in the Fingers, now held sway over the entire realm, from the scorching deserts of Dorne to the snowy expanse of the north. In the hush of the throne room, lit by high windows that speared dust motes through beams of pale morning light, he let his gaze rove among the assembled. Each face was a puzzle piece in the grand design he had crafted for so many years. He would make them all fit, one way or another. He recalled the first time he had entered these halls with little power to his name, relying on wit and cunning to earn the trust of King's Landing's power brokers. Varys, the spider, had once been his fiercest rival in the Dance of Secrets. But Littlefinger did not fear spiders only the moment his labyrinth of schemes might collapse. Yet collapse it had not. Every threat against him had been a rung on the ladder he climbed, using knowledge, bribes, and illusions to ascend higher than any man of such modest birth had a right to. And now, the throne under him felt less a prize to be won and more a stepping stone toward an even grander destiny. Peter Baelish did not merely want to rule the 7 kingdoms. He wanted to shape them in his own image. The days leading up to his coronation had been marked by a succession of cunning ploys. First, the War of the 5 Kings had left the realm fractured, ripe for subtle infiltration. He had quietly seized strong points of influence, the Vale with its gullible lords and its strategic mountain defenses, the north where chaos after the Bolton regime allowed for secret deals with those who craved security, and even the Riverlands, his old stomping ground where the seeds of loyalty to House Tully were overshadowed by a yearning for stability. Bit by bit, the cunning manipulator behind the scenes found a path to unify enough major lords under his cause. He made no large declarations. He simply encouraged everyone else to fight each other until they wore themselves out. By the time the realm turned weary eyes to him, he had already gathered enough pieces of power to declare himself the only real alternative to further chaos. And so, the lords paramount and various heads of minor houses had drifted, some willingly, some coerced, into his orbit. Cersei Lannister had been the last major obstacle, her vanity a shield around her cunning. Yet once she stood isolated, friendless, and lacking gold, her father's fortune depleted by endless wars, Littlefinger managed to propose a deal she could not refuse: safety for Tommen, the restoration of Lannister dignity, a comfortable life in the Rock, and the promise that she could remain a figure of influence if only she recognized his authority. Prideful as she was, there was no real choice for her or her son. Failure to bend would mean losing everything. Bending might secure her line for a generation. Peter had watched as she wrestled with her decision, how her gaze flitted across the newly disciplined gold cloaks who owed their loyalty to him, how the fortress of the Red Keep now obeyed his every whim. She had knelt, albeit with a scowl etched onto her lips. When King Tommen abdicated in favor of the Lord Regent who seemed to wield all effective power, the boy could almost pass as relieved. The crown weighed heavily and Tommen was still a child with no taste for blood or manipulation. Now Peter Baelish sat in the seat forged by Aegon the Conqueror's swords. The realm was under new management, and from dawn to dusk he wore the responsibilities of monarchy with careful poise. The small council was packed with those whose loyalty could be counted on, some bought, some intimidated, and some who genuinely saw Peter as the man who could usher in peace. Not that he believed in a lasting peace without constant vigilance. Power, he had learned, was best maintained by balancing fear and hope, forging alliances, and ensuring that no rival faction could accumulate enough strength to challenge his position. On his first day, he made a point of walking through the city. Word spread quickly that the king, some still called him His Grace, though Baelish had not yet crowned himself in any formal ceremony, was among the people. Dressed more simply than a monarch typically might, with only a small retinue of guards, he navigated the muddy streets of Flea Bottom, the winding alleys of the Street of Steel, and the bustling markets near the port. He exchanged coin for a warm bowl of stew from a poor woman who trembled with surprise to be serving the king. He paused to speak with fishermen, blacksmiths, and traveling merchants from Bravos. To the scowling guards he ordered gentleness, wanting the common folk to see him not as a distant tyrant but as one who remembered them, valued them. Word of these gestures spread like wildfire. The city's small folk had become accustomed to savage kings and queens, indifferent or outright brutal. A man who at least feigned kindness shone like a rare star in the black sky of their misfortune. That same evening, after returning to the Red Keep, he gathered his small council in the solar that overlooked Blackwater Bay. The waves shimmered under the torchlit walls, and a gentle breeze cooled the night. The men and women seated at the oaken table were an eclectic group. Lords from minor houses too small to threaten him but influential enough to keep the realm running. A few were recognized for their administrative talents. Some had proven unwavering loyalty, and still others were the best swords he could buy. He recognized that the realm needed a strong foundation of administrators, military minds, and, of course, his loyalists who excelled at the art of secrets. Balancing them was a fine art, and Peter loved it. He explained his vision. Tax reforms that would appease peasants and merchants alike, the rebuilding of roads to revitalize trade, the reorganization of the royal fleet to protect shipping lanes from pirate incursions, and the subtle but crucial infiltration of every major holdfast with spies loyal only to him. His council listened, sometimes murmuring in approval, sometimes glancing at each other in uncertainty. Many had grown used to corrupt practices and personal gain. Littlefinger was hardly altruistic, no illusions there, but he demanded efficiency. He would allow them to skim from the coffers to a certain degree, but not so much that it weakened his broader strategy. That, he knew, was a key to ruling effectively. Permit your underlings to indulge just enough that they remain content, but crack down when greed oversteps the boundaries of your carefully orchestrated plan. The weeks that followed demonstrated how quickly a realm could shift under determined leadership. Messages flew via Raven, summoning lords to King's Landing for a grand convocation. Peter draped his demands in the language of unity and promise. Outwardly, he wore the polished veneer of a benevolent ruler, cunning enough to flatter their pride while reminding them of his absolute authority. One by one, lords from the Stormlands, the Reach, the Westerlands, Dorne, the Vale, the Riverlands, and the North arrived. Each came with an entourage, each uncertain of the new power dynamic. The Red Keep's corridors bustled with more finery, pomp, and nervous whispers than they had seen in years. At these gatherings, Peter engaged in countless private audiences. He greeted Lord Tarley from the Reach, who eyed him with typical martial skepticism. He welcomed the new Lord Bolton from the north, though the name Bolton alone unsettled many, who found it more advantageous to bend than to contest Baelish's rule. House Martell's envoys arrived, still reeling from the tragedies that had befallen their family, open to new alliances that might avenge old wrongs or at least secure a place at the court. From the Westerlands, Kevin Lannister's heirs came, forging timid alliances, ensuring that the Lannister name would not be extinguished. Over numerous lavish feasts, the visitors witnessed something unfamiliar. A king who did not drink to excess, did not bellow insults, and did not posture with idle threats. If anything, Peter Baelish was civil, elegantly so, and approached each conversation like a precious negotiation. As the minstrels played soft tunes, he would glance around, listening more than speaking, collecting words the way a clever merchant collects coins. When he did speak, he sprinkled his discourse with just enough flattery or empathy to make each lord feel singled out and important. They left those feasts uneasy yet oddly intrigued. Here was a king who seemed to be forging a stable future, which was more than many had hoped for in the throes of chaos. There were, of course, pockets of resistance. In the north, some bannermen to House Stark bristled at the idea of bending the knee to Peter Baelish, the man rumored to have had a hand in so many betrayals. What had truly befallen Ned Stark or Lady Catelyn or Lisa Arryn, for that matter? Whispers circulated, though few dared speak openly. In the Iron Islands, the newly crowned Lord Reaver had little interest in swearing fealty to a cunning man from the mainland. But Baelish had anticipated all this. He nurtured old friendships among the Vale Knights, who now served as an elite cavalry, and promised them glory if they brought recalcitrant lords to heel. He bribed influential Ironborn captains with gold and promises of autonomy if they turned their sails away from raiding the coasts. Bit by bit, even the Iron Islands found themselves entangled in his web. Where force was needed, he used it swiftly and decisively, sending out loyal generals to crush minor rebellions before they grew. Where gold could solve a problem, he spent it freely, though he made sure the accounts were balanced by extracting wealth from new trade routes and protective tariffs. His crowning, when it finally came, was an event orchestrated as carefully as one of his many intrigues. He invited the Faith of the Seven to conduct the ceremony, a nod to tradition, while also giving space to red priests, the old gods, and other faiths, ensuring that no region felt excluded. The High Septon, robed in shimmering white cloth, placed a simple crown upon Baelish's head. Unlike the crowns of Targaryen or Baratheon kings, it was not ostentatious. It was wrought of slender Valyrian steel with small, glimmering emeralds. The symbolism was not lost on those present. Valyrian steel for strength and cunning, emeralds for the color of money, the coin that had first catapulted him into prominence. This was not the flamboyant crowning of a dragon king or a stag. This was the crowning of a man whose power stemmed from secrets and debts, alliances and whispered promises. When the High Septon proclaimed him Peter of the House Baelish, first of his name, King of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, a moment of profound silence followed. Then the great hall erupted in cheers, many of them calculated, some genuine. Through it all, Peter remained poised, a faint smile on his lips. He had done it. He had climbed the entire ladder of chaos, rung by rung, and reached its summit. Only he knew just how far he would go to remain there. He faced challenges almost immediately. Trade negotiations with the free cities needed to be reestablished. Braavos had grown wary of the crown's debts. The Iron Bank remembered how former rulers had defaulted on loans, and Peter needed them as allies, not enemies. He opened diplomatic channels, paid a portion of old debts promptly, and renegotiated the rest with favorable terms. Braavos recognized a shrewd partner and accepted. In Meereen, rumors floated that the exiled dragons, if any still lived, might someday return to contest the Seven Kingdoms. Peter dismissed such threats for the moment. He had no interest in the distant wars of slaver cities as long as they did not intrude on his domain. Closer to home, he spent the first months quelling lawlessness that lingered after years of war. Bandit gangs roamed parts of the Riverlands, pockets of the Westerlands were ravaged by outlaws, and the Stormlands had been neglected, their lords impoverished by repeated conflicts. Peter sent out crown-appointed justiciars with small but well-trained forces. They were accompanied by local lords to retain a sense of regional pride. It was a risk, giving these lords some measure of control, but it was necessary to keep them invested. The bandits were given a simple choice: lay down arms and be pardoned, or face swift, public executions that would remind others of the crown's authority. Many chose to surrender. A few, spurred on by fanatic loyalty to old pretenders, tried to fight. They were crushed and left as examples. Meanwhile, Peter's spies wove their web across the realm. He maintained the infrastructure of Little Birds as Varys had once done, but expanded it. He paid special attention to the children of the streets, who moved unnoticed through towns and castles, gleaning secrets from unsuspecting tongues. He forged alliances with brothels, businesses he had once so effectively run, offering them royal protection in return for information gleaned from pillow talk. The flow of secrets into the Red Keep was a steady river now, and Peter read each coded Raven scroll with a gleam in his gray-green eyes. His advantage lay in always knowing more than his adversaries, in anticipating their moves before they even realized they had made them. If knowledge was power, then Peter Baelish had become the most powerful man in the realm. He also played a careful game in forging a new bloodline. As a king, he needed heirs, legitimate children to inherit the throne and secure his dynasty. Many houses offered their daughters, some seeking to raise their fortunes by binding themselves to his newly established monarchy. Yet Peter surprised them all by choosing an alliance that no one anticipated. He proposed to wed a noblewoman from Dorne, the youngest daughter of a minor cadet branch of House Martell. It was not the politically obvious choice. Why not a Tyrell or a Lannister or a Tully? But Peter, in his wisdom, recognized the importance of bridging cultural divides. Dorne had always been half removed from the rest of Westeros, priding itself on its own customs. By marrying into the Dornish, Peter extended a genuine hand, one that might tie the southernmost kingdom to the crown more securely than any threat of force. The girl was clever and spirited, and her family was well-liked in Sunspear. Their wedding was a lavish event in King's Landing, and when he placed the bride's cloak over her shoulders, the court saw the beginnings of a new royal house that might truly unify the realm. Yet for all the outward stability, the threat of rebellion never fully vanished. Lords and ladies often bristle under centralized power, especially one that rose so swiftly from cunning rather than lineage. Peter's approach to such threats was twofold. First, he made sure to satisfy the ambitions of the major houses with grants of land or official titles, ensuring they had a stake in the new order. Second, he kept a dagger to their throats, metaphorically speaking. His spies reported every whisper of conspiracy, and Baelish was a master at turning conspirators against each other. Often, those who plotted would find themselves at odds with co-conspirators Peter had cleverly won over with bribes. No open revolt materialized, and isolated plots led to quick arrests or midnight disappearances. One plot, however, tested him severely. A group of disillusioned knights and minor lords from the north, still loyal to the memory of House Stark, attempted to rally a rebellion. Their hope was to enthrone a distant Stark cousin who they believed had a claim. They had the sympathy of certain factions in the Vale and the Riverlands. Peter took it as a personal affront. He had believed the North subdued, and the Vale wholly under his influence. He decided to handle it ruthlessly. He traveled north under the pretense of a royal progress, bringing a modest retinue, and requested an audience with these disgruntled lords. Seeing an opportunity, they agreed, hoping to corner him. To their shock, Peter arrived at the meeting accompanied by a full company of Vale knights, men whose lives and fortunes were bound to Baelish for reasons of land ownership, debt forgiveness, or personal loyalty. The would-be rebels found themselves surrounded in a small hall near the outskirts of Moat Cailin. Peter did not posture. He simply stated the facts. He had discovered their plan, and he had the power to end each of their bloodlines with a single command. Yet he offered them mercy. If they would kneel and pledge true loyalty to the crown, his crown, he would grant them leniency. If not, their families would forfeit lands and titles. The hall fell silent under the weight of his ultimatum. Slowly, grudgingly, one after another bent the knee. The sight filled Peter with a quiet triumph. Here were men who had once looked at him as a lesser. Now they prostrated themselves, their rebellion crushed before it could spark into flame. In the aftermath, Peter reinforced his grip on the North. He named a Lord Warden of the North from among those who had proven most reliable to him, carefully balancing the presence of Vale Knights. He also instituted policies that funneled the bounty of the southern trade into the north, ensuring roads were maintained and winter stockpiles were replenished. The northerners might not love him, but they would come to appreciate the benefits of having a king who understood the value of stability and investment. Over time, prosperity quelled resentments. Gold, after all, could buy a great deal of goodwill. Throughout the realm, the story repeated itself in miniature. Baelish advanced from crisis to crisis with a consistency that baffled even his critics. When a group of Dornish lords quarreled with Marcher lords over borderland disputes, Peter brokered a settlement that favored each side just enough to keep them placated, then quietly placed watchful stewards to ensure neither faction grew strong enough to challenge him. When the Ironborn tested his authority with renewed raids, he sent the royal fleet, rebuilt under his precise direction, to put them down quickly, employing cunning tactics to bottle them in their own harbors. He then offered a new deal to the Ironborn, immunity from the crown's wrath if they turned their reaving inclinations toward privateering under the royal banner, harassing pirate fleets in the Stepstones. They could keep a portion of the spoils, and the crown's coffers benefited from maritime security. A cunning compromise that turned potential enemies into guarded allies. In King's Landing, the City Watch was purged of corrupt officers loyal to past regimes. Peter established a new code of conduct, offering decent pay to discourage bribery and ensuring that the watch was beholden first and foremost to the crown. Under his rule, the city grew safer. Crime persisted, it always does, but it was more contained, and the presence of the watch in the streets, clad in newly polished cloaks, offered at least an image of stability. The city's markets thrived as merchants from Pentos, Lys, and Myr ventured into the capital with exotic goods. The crown taxed them fairly, and in return, Peter used the revenue to fund improvements, fresh water fountains, new trade roads, subsidies for guilds that might bolster local production. All the while, the king cultivated a certain mystique. He did not make flamboyant displays of power, he did not hold mass executions in the streets. Rather, his justice was swift and targeted, often enacted behind closed doors. He made sure his judgments were whispered about so that rumor and fact bled into one. Many nights, lords and ladies lay in bed, wondering how secure they truly were. Would the king's whisper network brand them traitors if they so much as gave voice to discontent at a feast? The aura of quiet omniscience served him well. Just as no one knew the extent of his fortune while he served as master of coin, no one could quite gauge the breadth of his knowledge now that he was king. That uncertainty kept them in line. And yet, if one were to look closely, they would see glimpses of the man behind the crown. In the quiet hours after the sun dipped below the horizon and the Red Keep's corridors emptied, Peter would retreat to his solar. There, amid documents and books, he would muse over the letters of old acquaintances long dead, running his finger over their signatures. His cunning had brought him unparalleled success, but at times he felt the weight of the ghosts in these halls: Catelyn Stark, Lisa Arryn, Ned Stark, those who had featured so heavily in his long climb. He would pour a glass of sweet Dornish wine and sip it slowly, eyes distant. Did he feel regret or loss? It was hard to say. Regret was something he had never publicly admitted. Perhaps in the deep recesses of his heart he felt twinges of sorrow for the illusions of love he had spun and the price others had paid for his ambition. Yet he consoled himself that in this broken world, greatness demanded sacrifice. And he, Peter Baelish, was now a very great man indeed. His marriage to the Dornish lady gave him heirs in time, 2 children, a boy first, then a girl. The realm noted how often Peter Baelish spent time with them, teaching them the basics of strategy, fostering a sense of curiosity in their young minds. He was not the sort of father to run around the courtyard in a mock sword fight, but he was always present in their education, guiding them with subtlety. He taught them about the importance of winning allies, of forging relationships as currency, of understanding the weaknesses and desires of those around them. He hired the best tutors from the Citadel, ensuring they were versed in letters, arithmetic, history, and the art of ruling. This new House Baelish, which had once seemed like an upstart branch, was being shaped into a dynasty. To the small folk, these developments mattered only insofar as they brought stability and a chance at a better life. They saw roads repaired, city guard patrols more consistent, and occasional royal decrees that reminded local lords not to overtax. They saw the king's willingness to celebrate festivals without bankrupting the treasury, a departure from some of the lavish extravagances of the past. They cared little for the intricate politics of the court, only that their fields yielded crops, that bandits did not steal their harvest, and that winter might be survivable with the crown's aid. In these respects, Peter Baelish's reign proved beneficial. He was no saint, but he was pragmatic, and that pragmatism recognized that a starving populace breeds rebellion. Still, the High Lords could never fully relax. The tension in King's Landing was a constant undercurrent. Peter had enemies, some of them old and patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Varys, who had once vanished across the narrow sea, was rumored to be weaving plots in Essos, perhaps harboring a Targaryen claimant or another pretender. Others believed he was dead. Peter did not lose sleep over the eunuch's whereabouts. He simply maintained watchers in every port, every city of Essos, paying the local underworld to report any sign of Targaryen banners or armies. And there were none to be found. If a Targaryen was alive, they were well hidden, and the realm had grown weary of illusions. Meanwhile, exiled knights and mercenary captains whispered of a rightful king or queen to unseat Baelish, but the realm did not hunger for another war. He used time as his ally, letting the memory of conflict slowly fade, replaced by a grudging acceptance that this cunning fox on the throne was far more tolerable than endless cycles of bloodshed. As the years passed, his regime consolidated. He carefully appointed new lords in areas where old houses had died off without heirs, ensuring each was beholden to him for their station. He established new trade treaties with distant lands, even forging a precarious relationship with the Dothraki by allowing them limited trade rights at ports, provided they did not raid inland. He invited master armorers from Cohort to settle in King's Landing, promising them coin and influence if they contributed to the crown's rearmament plans. Under Baelish's watch, the crown was always looking ahead, always prepared for the next threat, the next opportunity. One might assume that the story ended there, with the cunning man simply ruling in relative peace. But the Game of Thrones is never truly static. When a raven arrived one day bearing a message of possible rebellion in the Western Hills, led by a surviving Lannister branch that refused to be overshadowed, Peter read it with a quiet smile. He did not leap to dispatch an army. Instead, he wrote back to his warden in the Westerlands, offering a simple set of instructions. The rebellion's leaders, if they truly existed, were to be given a parley. Should they refuse or attempt to seize advantage, the warden would gather evidence of their sedition and dispatch the crown's justice swiftly. If they accepted the parley in earnest, Peter had an even more cunning plan. Incorporate them into the new administration by awarding them a regional administrative title. Turn them from would-be rebels into complacent vassals, ensnared by bureaucracy and the promise of wealth. Carrots first, sticks second. That method had served Peter well for decades. Part of the realm's acceptance of Baelish also stemmed from the queen's popularity. The Dornish lady he married carried herself with grace and warmth, and she seemed to genuinely care about the plight of those outside the capital. She traveled often, bringing moderate gifts to impoverished towns or negotiating with local septons for the improvement of roads and sept facilities. She championed small charities in King's Landing, an unusual concept that made her beloved among the common folk. Some whispered that the queen was the gentle side of the monarchy, soothing the bite of the king's cunning. Peter never discouraged this rumor. Let the people see her as a softening influence if it made them more content with his rule. Around the time their children started to come of age, Baelish hosted a grand tourney at King's Landing. It was a dazzling spectacle, one that invited knights from across Westeros to compete in jousting, melee, and archery. For many, it was reminiscent of the glorious days of tournaments under King Robert, but absent the undercurrent of drunken recklessness. Peter orchestrated it as a show of unity and power, awarding handsome prizes to winners and allowing merchants to set up extensive markets around the city. The revenue from the event, carefully managed, flowed into the crown's coffers. In the stands, lords and ladies cheered and took measure of each other's status. Alliances were formed or reinforced, marriages were arranged, and Peter watched it all from the royal box, the queen at his side, a subtle smile on his face. The clamor of hooves and the crash of steel on steel served as a potent reminder. Though he sat on the throne, the realm's martial spirit was alive and well. He needed to keep it harnessed under his banner. A highlight of the tourney was the final joust, featuring a mystery knight wearing green and silver, the colors of House Baelish. When this knight unhorsed a renowned champion from the Reach, the crowd gasped. When he removed his helm, they recognized the youthful features of the crown prince, Peter's own son. The shock rippled through the stands. Few had expected the young man, rumored to be bookish, to display such prowess. Peter had arranged for the best tutors in arms as well, away from prying eyes. Now the secret was revealed and the crowd roared its approval. The crown prince, bowing gracefully, then offered the victor's wreath to a Dornish maiden in the stands, a distant cousin of his mother's house. The gesture bridged old divides, eliciting applause. It was precisely the kind of symbolic unity Peter wanted the realm to see. Not a broken kingdom under a cunning manipulator, but a realm forging forward, bound by new traditions and shared prosperity. In private, after the tourney, Peter congratulated his son. The prince looked both proud and anxious, as if aware that every victory also invited new forms of rivalry. Peter placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and spoke quietly. "You have shown them your skill. Now you must show them your wisdom. Do not let them see your vulnerabilities, but do not become so distant that they suspect you of tyranny." The prince nodded solemnly, absorbing his father's counsel. Peter was forging his heir to be both respected and feared, a delicate balance. The princess, meanwhile, had taken an interest in the Citadel's learning. She seemed eager for knowledge of healing, astronomy, and the intricacies of Valyrian steel. Peter did not discourage her. A realm needed wise counselors, and if his daughter became adept in specialized fields, she would be a valuable asset. Some at court found it odd, a princess poring over tomes instead of being paraded around for a political match. Yet Peter recognized the power of knowledge. He funded her interests, ensured she had the best maesters to guide her, and told her never to stop questioning the world. Let the other houses cling to outdated traditions, expecting princesses to be docile ornaments. His daughter would be something else, sharp as a dagger, ready to cut through ignorance. As the realm settled into the second decade of Peter Baelish's rule, the general mood across Westeros was cautiously optimistic. Trade flourished, roads were safer, and while no king could be universally beloved, many recognized that the worst turmoil of the past wars had finally ended. New alliances had emerged, new bloodlines established. Even the faith, once a hotbed of zealotry, had stabilized under a high septon who was content to accept a modest flow of donations from the crown in exchange for tempered sermons. The seven kingdoms were becoming a tapestry carefully woven by Peter's guiding hand. Inevitably, challenges still loomed. There were rumors beyond the wall of strange sightings, mysterious creatures, or undead armies, but the Night's Watch was a shadow of its old self, and the realm had grown weary of supporting it. Peter kept an ear to those stories, occasionally sending a small group of rangers or knights north to investigate. Each time, they returned with unclear news, no tangible threat. Perhaps the white winds had carried the stories of ancient terrors away. Perhaps it was all myth. Perhaps not. For Peter, the best approach was vigilance. If a real threat materialized, he would deal with it swiftly. Until then, his resources were better spent maintaining peace in the populated regions. Through the years, the pace of life in the capital alternated between measured routine and carefully orchestrated pageantry. Peter sometimes strolled the gardens of the Red Keep, pondering the future. His past as Littlefinger flickered through his mind, a boy from the Fingers, mocked by greater lords. The image of his youthful self, standing awkwardly among scions of powerful houses, felt distant now. He had shattered every limit they had placed upon him. Yet power was a hungry beast. It demanded constant feeding, constant alertness. Resting on laurels was not an option. The day he grew complacent would be the day some cunning upstart discovered a weakness and exploited it, just as Peter once had. However, his rule was not devoid of genuine progress for the realm. In addition to roads and trade, Baelish supported a wave of new constructions, including expanded harbors, watchtowers along the coasts, and improved fortifications at critical mountain passes. He recognized that strong infrastructure was another form of security, preventing rebellious lords or external foes from easily severing the kingdom's ties. The citadel in Old Town, initially wary of a man they deemed a mere schemer, grew to respect his consistent funding for scholarship and invention. Peter financed a few adventurous maesters who toyed with mechanical wonders or advanced irrigation techniques. Some of these experiments failed, but a few succeeded, bringing modest improvements to farming yields and reducing the damage of seasonal floods. Behind his forward-thinking governance lay the unwavering truth that Baelish's hold on power depended on weaving compromise and fear. If fear alone kept the lords in line, a single strong rebellion might topple him. If compromise alone guided his reign, some ambitious house might amass enough wealth or alliances to threaten him. The balance was delicate and demanded constant readjustment. He handled his private frustrations with composure, writing letters late into the night or summoning individuals for one-on-one conversations that felt cordial on the surface but were effectively subtle interrogations. Those who left his presence often found themselves sweating, uncertain how many of their secrets had been laid bare. Time shaped Peter's persona into that of a formidable yet strangely understated monarch. He did not engage in grand hunts like King Robert, nor did he scream for heads like Joffrey. He did not brandish dragons like Daenerys or manipulate the realm through terror like Cersei. Instead, he sat behind his desk or on the Iron Throne when ceremony demanded, carefully orchestrating the realm's affairs. When he traveled, it was often incognito or in small groups, popping up unexpectedly in distant corners of the kingdom, verifying rumors and punishing corruption without fanfare. That unpredictability cemented the idea that the king saw everything, knew everything. The wheel of the seasons turned, short winters came and went. Thanks to his foresight, the realm never experienced the sort of mass starvation that plagued it in previous decades. Granaries stocked in times of plenty helped the small folk endure lean periods. This alone earned Peter a measure of reluctant gratitude from peasants who might not understand or like his methods but knew that life had, in some ways, improved. No king is ever without detractors, but the majority had food in their bellies and fields that did not burn with the fury of war. For many, that was enough. His queen bore him one more child, a second son, bright-eyed and curious. The court was abuzz with this addition to the royal line, speculating on successions and potential marriages. Peter quietly put down any bickering about claims. He intended the firstborn prince to inherit, but a capable second son offered further diplomatic possibilities, perhaps a marriage alliance with a key house or a position of authority that could quell dangerous ambitions. Every child was a new piece on the board to be nurtured, loved, and ultimately positioned for the good of House Baelish. Inevitably, as Peter aged, he found new ways to sustain his hold. He delegated certain responsibilities to the small council, though he never stopped overseeing them personally. His master of whispers reported daily, feeding him tidbits of scandal or discontent. The master of coin, ironically enough, was a skilled woman from the Reach who oversaw finances with near Baelish-like precision, though not quite as creatively. The Lord Commander of the King's Guard, a loyal knight from the Vale who had served Peter for years, ensured the king's safety in a more visible way. Baelish understood that while personal cunning was indispensable, the monarchy also needed the pomp and presence that came from a strong guard. All the while, the lords of Westeros adapted. They learned to speak diplomatically, to keep their ambitions hidden unless they sensed Baelish's consent. They managed their bannermen with more caution, aware that any slip might draw the king's attention. Some quietly resented the stifling atmosphere of constant surveillance, longing for a ruler who would let them wage their own petty wars. But many more recognized the practical benefits of stability. Prosperity had returned in increments to the Seven Kingdoms, and with it a sense of normalcy that had been absent for too long. That sense of normalcy, ironically, was the greatest testament to Baelish's success. He had secured the realm so well that the horrors of the past felt like distant nightmares. In hushed corners, certain maids and stewards recalled the day Littlefinger first arrived in King's Landing, a sly smile on his lips and too much ambition in his eyes. They marveled at how far he had come, how he had outlasted and outmaneuvered the Lannisters, the Baratheons, the Tyrells, and even the remnants of the Targaryens. They whispered that he must have made a pact with dark forces to achieve this. But those were just superstitions. Peter Baelish needed no demons at his side. He had cunning, patience, and an innate gift for reading human hearts. That had been enough to place a crown on his head. Occasionally, after a long day of diplomacy and decision-making, Peter would walk out onto the battlements of the Red Keep. From there, he could see the sprawl of King's Landing rooftops, winding streets, the dull glow of lanterns at night. He would recall his earliest days, a cunning youth with too much pride, enthralled by the Tully daughter, overshadowed by the great names around him. He had often felt powerless then, at the mercy of a world that revolved around ancient families and bloody traditions. Yet he had turned that feeling into his weapon, forging cunning schemes to rise above them all. Looking over the city he now ruled, he experienced a sense of victory as profound as it was tranquil. He had beaten them at their own game. He had turned the lord's arrogance, the ladies' pretenses, and the small folks' yearnings into stepping stones. And he had done it without a single dragon, without an army of unstoppable warriors, without a storied name or an ancient sigil. He had done it with intrigue, compromise, and a willingness to do what others would not. The price of that climb was incalculable, measured in lives lost, hearts broken, and illusions shattered. But on nights like these, when the soft wind carried the distant hum of city life, Peter Baelish could breathe in the sweet air of triumph. His rule continued to expand in subtle ways. He encouraged a modest cultural renaissance, inviting poets, musicians, and artisans to King's Landing and offering them patronage. These artists, grateful for royal support, composed ballads praising the king's wisdom and Queen's kindness. The city became a center of refined culture, attracting even foreign dignitaries eager to partake in the evolving tapestry of Westerosi art. Peter recognized that the stories people tell shape the identity of a kingdom as much as any edict or tax. And so, with carefully nurtured patronage, he fostered stories that spoke of House Baelish as a benevolent, forward-thinking monarchy that had pulled Westeros from the brink of endless war. As his hair turned silver at the temples, he faced the question of succession more frequently. His firstborn son was poised to inherit, well-schooled in diplomacy and swordsmanship. Peter observed him from a distance, ensuring the prince understood the importance of forging his own networks of alliances and knowledge. He introduced him to the intricacies of the small council, gave him a controlled taste of governance, and watched how he handled himself. Some part of Baelish recognized that the boy would never be quite as cunning or as relentless as his father. But perhaps that was for the best. A slightly softer hand, still guided by the structures Peter had put in place, might keep the realm stable for generations to come. The second son, meanwhile, was stationed as a potential candidate for the King's Guard or as a future viceroy of some strategic region. The daughter blossomed into a sharp-minded woman who contributed significantly to the small council on matters of scholarship and innovation. Together, they formed the nucleus of a new generation of Baelish power. Looking back over the tapestry of his reign, Peter Baelish could enumerate the key pillars of his success. The first was knowledge, cultivating spies, reading situations, anticipating moves. The second was economics, ensuring the flow of gold, avoiding crippling debts, rewarding loyalty while punishing betrayal. The third was alliances, forging pragmatic agreements that cut across old feuds, uniting Dorne with the Vale, the North with the Riverlands, and bridging rifts with the Lannisters. The fourth was ruthlessness, never letting sentiment override the best path forward, never hesitating to remove threats with quiet efficiency. These pillars undergirded every policy, every relationship, every royal decree. And so, under the reign of Petyr Baelish, Littlefinger no more, the Seven Kingdoms found an era of subdued peace. It was not a golden age of heroic knights and chivalry, it was an age of calculated stability where feasts were not overshadowed by the immediate fear of war, where trade caravans traversed roads with fewer dangers, where the memory of the War of the Five Kings became a cautionary tale told by grandparents. The name Baelish, once easy to dismiss, was now spoken with respect and caution throughout Westeros. If some lords yearned for a return to the good old days of great houses clashing, they kept their yearnings to themselves, aware that Baelish's network of ears and eyes would swiftly sniff out any move toward open rebellion. At times, Petyr considered the what-ifs of his life. What if he had never loved Catelyn Tully? What if he had never challenged Brandon Stark and carried the dagger scar on his chest? What if he had resigned himself to a modest existence in the Fingers? Each question circled back to the same answer: he would never have been satisfied living in the shadow of others, letting them shape the realm. From the earliest days of his youth, he had possessed a longing to prove himself, to demonstrate that wit and audacity could trump raw power or noble birth. Now he had proven it on a scale unmatched by any upstart in living memory. The song of Littlefinger's ascent was not one of gallantry, but it was undeniably a success story, especially from his perspective. He believed wholeheartedly that he had brought more good than harm to the Seven Kingdoms in the long run. Had not the wars claimed far more lives than his quiet manipulations ever did? Had he not ended the cycles of bloodshed and petty vengeance by corralling each faction into a system that rewarded loyalty and punished dissent? In Petyr Baelish's mind, the realm's peace justified the strategies he used to attain and keep the throne. And as for the Iron Throne itself, that twisted seat of melted swords, it no longer seemed so formidable to him. It was a chair like any other, a symbol of authority, yes, but only one piece of the mosaic of power he wielded. Even as he held audiences in the Red Keep's throne room, he sometimes found himself drifting into recollections of simpler times in the Eyrie or the old brothels of King's Landing, moments when he had to conceal every scheme behind a mockingbird pin. Now the entire realm wore his pin, in a sense, each lord and lady complicit in supporting a regime built upon cunning. It was a far cry from the illusions of chivalric romance he once held as a boy, but illusions rarely survive the crucible of ambition. In that crucible, Petyr Baelish had been reforged into a king, King Petyr the Subtle. Some might call him a tyrant of whispers, others might call him a savior from chaos. He preferred to see himself as a craftsman of order, forging a better realm out of the shattered remnants left by others. History would judge him as it does all rulers, but until then he would shape the present to match his vision. If the realm prospered and the common folk slept without fear of rampant bloodshed, then let the lords and ladies fret over whether his methods were too Machiavellian. In the Game of Thrones, it was victory that mattered, and Petyr Baelish had emerged victorious indeed. Thus, day after day, year after year, Baelish continued to reign, refining his web of influences, nurturing an era of subdued prosperity. No major house dared openly challenge him. The small folk found their lot in life marginally improved. The realm turned its eyes forward rather than backward, and on the rare nights when Petyr allowed himself the indulgence of reflection, he might wander into the throne room when it was empty and run a hand along the cold metal of the swords that comprised the throne. Each blade had belonged to a defeated foe in ages past, hammered together into a reminder of conquest. In his own subtle way, he had bested more foes than any of those ancient kings, albeit with fewer battles and less ceremony. He had carved his legend not in steel and dragonfire, but in secrets, alliances, and patient strategy. Perhaps that was the final irony, that a man born with neither fortune nor noble name, a man scorned and dismissed by the powerful, would one day assume the ultimate seat of that power and hold it more effectively than most who had worn a crown before him. The courtiers whispered that he would be remembered as Petyr the Pragmatic, or the King of Coin, or the Weaver of Whispers. He did not concern himself with grand titles. After all, what use were they compared to the tangible reality of ruling? What if Littlefinger ruled the Seven Kingdoms? That question, which once seemed outlandish, had become the simple truth of daily life in Westeros. And for most, life went on: work, love, birth, death, all under the watchful, calculating eye of the man on the Iron Throne. No grand heroes rose to overthrow him, no dragons set fire to the capital. The realm breathed a sigh of uneasy relief and, in time, came to accept him as the king it neither expected nor entirely trusted, but who nonetheless delivered a measure of peace. In that acceptance lay Baelish's greatest triumph, for apathy and weary resignation can be more enduring than any fleeting burst of rebellious passion. So the sun rose and set over a kingdom that had, at last, found stability under a once unthinkable ruler. Peter Baelish surveyed it all with a calm satisfaction, secure in the knowledge that the fires of war had dimmed and the forging of a lasting legacy had begun. The king who climbed the ladder of chaos rung by rung now occupied a perch that overlooked all the petty squabbles below. Should any dare to climb after him, he would be waiting with a smile, prepared to show them how easy it was to be cast down into the yawning depths once more. He had won. And for the realm, at least for now, that victory meant order and a future free from the haunting shadows of endless strife. If nothing else, Peter Baelish gave Westeros an era of peace underpinned by secrets and steel. In a world so often bathed in blood, perhaps that was the greatest triumph of all. Peter Baelish often reflected that the realm had come a long way since the wars that had nearly torn it apart. Any rider who traveled the King's Road from the Neck to the Crownlands would observe a land that, on the surface, appeared at peace. The fields were tended by untroubled peasants, caravans meandered along roads that had once been scarred by bandits and marauders, travelers found freshly built inns near borders that used to be bristling with armed guards. To the casual observer, these changes would suggest a prosperous kingdom governed by a fair-minded king. In a way, they were not wrong. Yet if one looked beyond the veneer, one saw the intricate, relentless vigilance that underpinned this entire structure, the watchers in every port, the subtle alliances in every holdfast, the veiled threats behind every smile. For Peter Baelish, that balance was the essence of rule. He liked to rise early in the mornings and stroll through the royal gardens. A hush lingered there at dawn, the dew upon the grass reflecting the pale sunlight in droplets of gold. The Red Keep's gardeners had worked diligently to expand these once rather modest plots into grander grounds, with small courtyards of lemon trees imported from Dorne and rows of pale winter roses rumored to be from the north. Each swirl of petals meant as a subtle tribute to the unity of the Seven Kingdoms. Peter walked among them in a simple doublet, accompanied by only 2 members of the King Guard. Even the white cloaks followed him at a respectful distance, giving the king time to think. On these mornings, he would pause to touch a flower's bloom or stand by the parapet to watch the city stirring awake. Already he would see ships gliding into the Blackwater rush, gold and green banners on the masts signifying they did business under the crown's protection. The city watch patrolled the docks, collecting taxes with a diligence that had taken years to instill. A handful of fishermen's boats brought in the day's first catch, eager to sell it in the early markets. Peter considered the day ahead. Audiences. Petitions. Perhaps a private conversation with that newly arrived envoy from Pentos who claimed his prince sought a deeper alliance. It was an unceasing stream of responsibilities. But the alternative was unthinkable, letting others make decisions unmonitored, letting power slip from his careful grasp. Having climbed to the pinnacle of the realm, Peter Baelish had no intention of falling off the top of that ladder. No man, woman, or force, mortal or otherwise, would wrest it away unless he grew careless. One such morning, he received an unexpected visitor. A raven arrived from Harrenhal, that old ruin once granted to Peter by the Lannisters in payment for his services. Over the years, Baelish had rarely lingered there, but he stationed a capable steward to keep the fortress at least partially functional. The letter bore news that an old enemy of his, believed long dead or exiled, had been spotted in the region, moving under a false name. The steward's words were careful: "We have not apprehended him as yet, for fear of alerting others to our awareness. Your guidance is awaited." A flicker of tension moved across Peter's face as he read. Then he smiled. Would it be one of the old conspirators, perhaps an exiled Fry or a distant Lannister cousin? He found the idea intriguing. The realm had grown almost too predictable of late. A piece from the past might be exactly the impetus required to remind everyone that threats still lurked. He closed his eyes, tapping the letter against his palm, then summoned a discreet scribe. "Send word to my steward in Harrenhal," he said quietly, "to keep watch on this individual and to keep me informed. If he attempts to flee, capture him quietly. No public arrests, no outcries. I wish to handle this myself." The scribe bowed and left. Peter folded the missive into a neat square and slipped it into his doublet. Already his mind churned with possibilities. He would handle it as he always did, in a calm, meticulous manner, putting out the spark before it fanned into flame. Shortly afterward, the king made his way to the throne room where supplicants already gathered. The great hall still inspired awe with its high, vaulted ceilings of stone, the towering stained-glass windows that dappled the floor in watery light, and the iron throne itself looming at the far end on its raised dais. Peter ascended the steps without drama. He took his seat and, with a practiced motion, arranged the drape of his green and silver cloak. The Master of Laws announced the day's first petitions, a minor dispute between a Stormlands merchant and a blacksmith from the Westerlands. Peter listened attentively, asked a few precise questions, then decreed a fair settlement that satisfied neither party entirely but didn't anger them enough to cause trouble. After there came a request for a new bridge over a small but critical river crossing in the Reach, whose banks often flooded in spring. Peter approved the funds from the royal treasury but attached conditions. The local lord was to ensure a portion of the collected tolls would flow back to King's Landing. Balanced governance, underwritten by deals that bound the lords closer to his system of coin and order. By midday, the petitions concluded and he retired with the small council to the solar. The table was laid with wine, bread, and fresh olives from Dorne. Attending were the Master of Whispers, a wiry man with large ears always turned for gossip, the Master of Coin, Lady Merrill of Houseflowers, an illegitimate daughter of a once powerful family in the Reach who had proven herself indispensable with numbers. The Master of Laws, Lord Estermont, pragmatic and sharp-eyed, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard, who offered counsel on security matters, and several other minor functionaries. Peter glanced around the table, gauging moods. They looked comfortable, but not too comfortable. Good. Reports from the Narrow Sea, began the Master of Whispers, suggest a grouping of sail ships under a new banner. The talk is that they've found a sponsor in Liss. Likely mercenaries, some say pirates. They're calling themselves the Crimson Tide. Not numerous enough to be an immediate threat, but caution would be wise. Peter nodded. Send a few discreet vessels to shadow their movements. If they near our shipping lanes, we'll address them. Offer them a royal charter if they'd like to turn privateer in our service. His lips curled in a brief smile. But make sure we keep them at arm's length. I want to know if they accept any new contracts from potential enemies of the crown. Yes, your grace, murmured the Master of Whispers, scribbling notes. Next, Lady Merrill cleared her throat. The Iron Bank has proposed new trade initiatives, including a revised interest rate on the Crown's consolidated loan, contingent on us allowing them a certain measure of influence in the city's financial district. They'd like to set up a permanent representative office near the port. Officially, it would be for trade facilitation and currency exchange. Peter leaned forward. A permanent Bravosi presence in King's Landing is no small matter. I've no wish to let the Iron Bank oversee too many of our affairs, but refusing them outright might sour our relationship. He paused. We can allow them a small office, but ensure it's heavily taxed, an administrative fee, if you will, and watched. Place a pair of our own officials nearby under the guise of joint oversight. That way we gain the improved trade but keep them from interfering too deeply in local commerce. Lady Merrill nodded. It shall be done, your grace. Lord Estermont glanced from the king to the rest of the council. We also have that matter of the faith militants still unsettled. They've been quiet since your grace's ascension, but certain septons in the backcountry have revived talk of rearming. A handful of them resent the crown's support for multiple religions. They want the faith of the seven to reign supreme again. Peter waved a dismissive hand. Discontented septons grumbling in dusty septs are not our worry so long as they don't incite open rebellion. Let the High Septon be reminded of the old days when a too powerful faith tried to direct the monarchy. We all saw how that ended for them under the Lannisters. If they wish to rearm, they'll need gold and steel. Both are in short supply when the crown does not endorse them. Keep an ear out but do nothing unless they mobilize. Meanwhile, ensure the High Septon remains content. Increase the crown's donation to the faith by a modest amount, enough so he will be indebted to us. The council murmured agreement. Peter let his gaze flicker from face to face, and in their eyes he saw what he wanted to see, a careful respect. He did not want them to fear him so much they would form conspiracies, nor did he want them too assured of their own power. This balance was his daily art. When the council dispersed, Peter retreated for a brief midday respite. In his private chambers he found his queen. She looked up from a letter she had been reading, her dark Dornish hair loosely braided, her garments an elegant merge of Dornish color and Westerosi cut. Over the years, she had grown into her role, the unifying figure who softened his sharp edges. The small folk loved her, the court admired her grace, and Peter benefited from her presence in more ways than just forging alliances. She was clever, if not as politically minded as he, and her genuine empathy could soothe anxious lords where Peter's cunning might put them on edge. She set the parchment aside. You look thoughtful, she said. Did something happen in council today? He gave a small shrug. Little enough. Old problems dressed in new guises. But that is the nature of power. He stepped forward to take her hand. Despite the many years of their marriage, she still regarded him with a subtle curiosity, as though never entirely certain what moved behind his eyes. He appreciated that. A spouse too transparent in her own motivations might prove easy to dismiss. One who was ever so slightly mysterious kept him intrigued. "I received a letter from your daughter," she said. "She writes from Old Town, where she's studying under maesters. She sounds well, if a bit homesick. She mentioned a new invention, something about a lens that improves reading by moonlight." Peter arched an eyebrow, partly in pride. "She does have an inquisitive mind. I suppose she inherited that from me, though I'd never compare my talents to the complexities of a maester's chain." He paused. "Tell her she can return to court whenever she likes, but that I value her academic pursuits. Knowledge is a currency rarer than gold and often more powerful." The queen laughed softly. "You see, all knowledge is a currency." Then her tone grew more serious. "When will you decide on her betrothal? She's of age, and many houses have expressed interest." Peter weighed his words carefully. He had no desire to rush. His daughter could be far more valuable as an unwed princess, a potential bond to dangle before one of the realm's major houses, or even a foreign power should the situation demand. "No immediate hurry," he said at last. "The time will come, and I'll ensure it's the right match. Until then, let her enjoy her freedom." The queen studied him a moment, then acquiesced with a graceful nod. They spoke of lighter matters for a while: the expansion of the palace gardens, the queen's desire to host a small festival during the harvest season. Then Peter returned to the demands of the day. He wrote letters, oversaw the final draft of new trade tariffs, and quietly dispatched coded instructions to Harrenhal to monitor that unknown figure who lingered near the fortress. Evening found the king in the small library of the Red Keep. He had expanded the royal collection of books significantly, forging alliances with maesters who rummaged through old archives across Westeros to bring valuable tomes to King's Landing. For Peter, knowledge was not just a pastime. It was security. If the realm faced new threats, he wanted to see them coming, to have the context of history at his fingertips. Sometimes old scrolls contained keys to ancient puzzles, references to once-forgotten alliances or potential claims. He had no intention of letting any such detail slip by. He lit a single lamp, the flame's dancing glow illuminating the parchment before him. It was an account of the last days of King Maegor Targaryen, described as a tyrant who had built the Red Keep with cruelty and brutality, only to die under strange circumstances. Peter read the lines about desertions and betrayals, about families who feigned loyalty until it was time to strike. The margin in this old account bore a scrawl in a maester's hand: "When absolute fear reigns, it begets treachery." Peter smiled faintly. Indeed, too much terror led to revolt, too much leniency to opportunists. A king needed both honey and venom. Satisfied, he placed the parchment aside and extinguished the lamp. The days slipped into a pattern of careful governance. To outsiders, it might have felt repetitive, but Peter understood that monarchy was as much about daily diligence as it was about grand gestures. He gave audience to foreign envoys, negotiated shipping routes, received oaths of fealty from newly risen lords, and occasionally attended weddings or funerals of highborn individuals where his presence was expected. Each event was an opportunity to tighten a knot, to secure a thread. He never missed a chance to speak quietly with the father of a bride or the widow of a lord, gleaning secrets or forging new understandings. Meanwhile, roads kept being built, the city watch expanded patrols to outlying villages, and the populace continued to acclimate to an age of subtle watchfulness. Yet beneath the calm, a friction brewed. Discontented voices never truly vanished. Some found a mouthpiece in minor lords who resented the centralized power in King's Landing. Others whispered about old claimants with better bloodlines. Still others questioned how this upstart from the Fingers had the right to wear a crown at all. That restlessness simmered. Peter's master of whispers reported new rumors each week. Faint, tenuous plots that rarely made it past drunken tavern talk. So far, none had grown teeth, but Peter never took such matters lightly. He had the advantage of a well-established network of informants, men and women who had spent years under his payroll, gleaning knowledge from halls and alleyways alike. If there was a growing conspiracy, he would sense the subtle changes in the realm's pulse. One evening, a hush fell over the Red Keep when a dispatch arrived from Harrenhal. The steward's seal was broken by Peter's own hand, and he read the words with narrowed eyes. The unidentified figure near the ruin had been quietly apprehended while attempting to bribe a guard into letting him see the Lord of Harrenhal. That in itself was odd, for Baelish had not dwelled there for years. The steward wrote, "He is an older man, scarred, claims knowledge that would interest your grace. He refused to reveal details until he can meet you face to face." Peter found the curiosity gnawing at him. For decades he had known so many secrets about so many people that he occasionally wondered if anyone still existed who could unnerve him. Yet this letter hinted at something. To personally entreat the presence of the king at Harrenhal? Bold? Foolhardy even. But it could be dangerous to ignore. Someone from the old days who might recall the steps Peter had taken to climb the ladder. Could it be a fisherman from the Fingers? A Bravosi sellsword once hired for some scheme? The possibilities lingered like a half-forgotten tune. That very night, Peter made his preparations to travel incognito, and at dawn he set out by horse with a small retinue of Vale Knights sworn to him personally. He told only the Queen that he was departing on a matter of state, ensuring her that it posed no immediate danger. She, used to his discreet journeys, kissed him farewell but did not pry. The Vale Knights donned plain armor and carried no regal banners. Peter wore a simple dark cloak. They left King's Landing quietly, blending with other travelers on the roads. They avoided large towns when possible, stopping only in out-of-the-way inns for rest. It took them several days to arrive at Harrenhal, where the black towers jutted against the sky, their tops warped by dragonfire centuries past. The fortress's gloom still oppressed those who entered it, though Peter privately found it a suitable monument to the illusions of grandeur. How many conquerors had believed themselves invincible here, only for fortune to shift? The steward, an older man named Kendon, greeted him in the courtyard with a respectful bow. "Your Grace, the man you seek is held in the lower keep, under guard as you instructed. He's not been harmed, but we did search him thoroughly for weapons. He carried only a small dagger of Bravosi steel." Peter nodded. "Well done. I'll speak with him at once." They walked through dank corridors, torchlight flickering on the stone walls. A musty smell lingered. The curse of Harrenhal, people said, though Peter recognized it as simple neglect. Before a stout door of iron bars, the steward paused as if to offer Peter a final chance to reconsider. Peter merely gestured for him to open it. Inside was a small, windowless chamber, a single brazier throwing weak light into the gloom. On a bench sat a man with thinning hair and a rough beard, shoulders stooped from years of hardship. He rose when he saw Peter, then sank to one knee. An observer might have assumed him a common beggar, but the glint in his eye suggested otherwise. Peter took a step closer, letting his retinue hover near the doorway. "You asked for me," he said with quiet authority. "You have me. Speak quickly, I've no taste for riddles." The man lifted his eyes. For an instant, a flicker of recognition passed across his features as though seeing a ghost. "I knew you'd come," he murmured. "I told the guards. Only Peter Baelish would want to hear what I have to say." Peter's eyes narrowed. "You speak as if you know me. Yet your face is new to me. Who are you?" A rough laugh escaped the stranger's throat. "If I told you the name I once used, it might mean nothing. I've used so many names in these years. But I served certain figures you once worked against. Men who entrusted me with errands. Quiet errands. I was at the Red Wedding, though none saw me. I was at the Airy once, though I was not a guest. I know how you moved the pieces to ensure your ascendance. And I know a secret that might unmake you if shared with the right people." Peter felt a stir of caution. "A secret," he repeated coolly, "that could unmake me. You're either very bold or very foolish. Both, perhaps." The man chuckled again, low and humorless. "I had a life once in service to House Fry. That alone tells you how far I've fallen. But I have no love for them now. Nor do I love you. I only love the gold you can give me to forget I ever saw you. Or I can tell certain Stark loyalists in the north what truly happened in King's Landing when Ned Stark was seized. I can whisper of your doings in the Vale, your part in Lady Lisa Arryn's demise, your manipulations of Sansa Stark." Peter's face remained still, but inside his mind raced. Old ghosts indeed. He had been careful to bury evidence of those intrigues. Yet presumably, some individuals had gleaned scraps. He had no illusions that his entire path to power was squeaky clean, it was riddled with bodies. But this was the first time in years someone had dared to confront him so openly with these old accusations. This man might be bluffing, but then again, sometimes a single shred of proof was all that disgruntled lords needed to spark a rebellion. Even if no one fully believed the rumor itself could become a rallying cry for those who hated the Baelish crown. Peter let a slow smile curve his lips. "Blackmail, then? How unoriginal. If you knew me at all, you'd know I don't respond well to threats." The man lifted his chin. "I'm sure you'd have me killed. But then my friends would pass on the letters I've already sent. My knowledge can't die with me, King Peter. A flicker of annoyance passed through Peter's thoughts, though outwardly he remained collected. This was more complex than a simple interrogation. So you propose that I pay you, and you vanish across the sea to live out your days in comfort, yes? Or perhaps you'll return in a few years for more gold once your purse runs dry. I propose a deal, the man said. Gold, yes, or a royal favor. Something that allows me to remain comfortable under your rule. But also, I'd like a guarantee of my safety. If you kill me, others will reveal what I know. If you try to buy me off without giving me a place in your realm, I can't trust you not to hunt me. Peter gave a soft laugh. You think you're that valuable? He turned away, letting the tension build. And what, precisely, do you believe you know that could unmake me? The man didn't hesitate. That you orchestrated Lord Eddard Stark's downfall, that you were behind Lady Lisa's accident, that you manipulated the War of the Five Kings for your own advantage, that you conspired to pass off Sansa Stark as your niece to keep the North in your pocket. I don't doubt you have means to deny these, but I've gleaned accounts, letters, fragments of personal diaries from the Vale. Enough to spark doubt in powerful minds. Enough to lead them to investigate further. Peter turned slowly, eyes cold. You've done your research. Inside, Peter weighed the possibility that the man had genuine evidence. The mention of diaries from the Vale pricked his attention. Lisa had kept rambling journals at times, though many were destroyed. If anything remained, and if it included even half-truths, it could be dangerous. I see. You want me to believe you hold all the cards. But you seem to have miscalculated. Even if I choose to let you live, you will spend the rest of your days glancing over your shoulder, wondering if my men are coming for you. That's no real life at all. True enough, the man admitted. So give me a station. Let me be something in your court, an unimportant role but official enough that your people must protect me, and close enough that you can keep watch over me. That's how we both stay safe. You might choose to kill me eventually, but I'll be watching for it. And if I vanish suddenly, my letters will be opened by men who hate you more than they fear you. Peter exhaled softly. The man had a keen sense for the game. A naive blackmailer would have asked only for gold, or threatened to run. But this one offered a twisted version of the spider's deal. Keep your enemy close so neither can betray the other. Clever, but also fraught with risk. Peter sensed an opportunity too. If this man truly possessed the fragments of evidence he claimed, maybe Peter could find and destroy them once the man was in the Red Keep, or bribe or eliminate whatever Confederates he had. Then the threat would vanish. He studied the man for a long moment. Your name? The blackmailer hesitated. Corin Waters, he said eventually. The watery eyes flickered at Peter. Is it my real name? Perhaps not. But it will do. Peter nodded absently. Very well. You shall accompany me to King's Landing under guard. There we will find you a modest position, perhaps in the customs office of the port. You'll be paid a salary and placed under watch. In return, you will hand over every scrap of evidence you hold, letters, diaries, all of it. You'll also pen a list of your associates so that I can be certain your so-called revelations won't leak if you happen to trip down the Red Keep stairs one night. Agreed. Corin eyed him, then gave a short laugh. Agreed, Your Grace. Though I'll keep a few safeguards in reserve, I think. Peter's expression remained impassive. Of course you will. So long as you don't think to cross me entirely. I'm prepared to be lenient in exchange for your cooperation. But if you betray me, I promise you the fate of Heron the Black. A flicker of fear crossed Corin's eyes, but he masked it with an uneven smile. I have no wish to be burned alive in my own fortress. I'll behave. Peter turned to his knights. Escort Master Waters to a more comfortable chamber. Let him rest and bathe. Provide him decent clothing. But keep 2 guards at his door at all times and ensure all his correspondence is read before it leaves Harrenhal. He shot Corin a final glance. You've chosen a dangerous path. Let's hope you're as clever as you think. He left the man behind and moved through the castle corridors, the steward in tow. In the gloom, Harrenhal's ghost seemed to stir. Peter felt a swirl of old memories rising, the recollection that Harrenhal had been a cursed seat for every lord who held it. Perhaps it was foolish to cling to it as a title, perhaps it was wise to keep it as a vantage point. Either way, that sense of living among ruins echoed the precarious nature of every monarchy. No king reigned forever, no fortress was truly impregnable. Yet, with careful play, one could stave off the inevitable. That night, in Herrenhol's best-maintained bedchamber, Peter sat by a flickering hearth, writing letters to be sent on the morrow. One was to his master of whispers, instructing him to prepare discreet watchers for this Corin waters. Another was to his steward, commanding a search for any old diaries or letters belonging to Lady Lisa that might have survived. If such documents existed, he would have them destroyed or altered. He would not rely on chance. He slept lightly, haunted by half-remembered dreams. Lisa Arryn's face contorted in heartbreak, the glint of a dagger pressed to Ned Stark's throat, Sansa's terrified eyes in King's Landing. These had been stepping stones on his way to a crown. Sometimes he rationalized that the realm had benefited from his cunning. Fewer wars now, more stability. But old deeds left a residue, and in the quiet of the night, they sometimes returned to remind him of the cost. Yet morning came, and with it, his composure was restored. By the time the sun rose, he was ready to depart, knights in formation behind him, and Corin waters riding under watch in the rear. The road back to King's Landing stretched out through the riverlands like a winding tapestry of farmland and villages. Peter's mind churned with new calculations. Once, he might have been unnerved by the possibility that someone could blackmail him. Now, it was just another problem to solve. They traveled for several days, unremarkable except for a single incident where a group of bandits, ignorant of the king's identity, tried to ambush the column. The Vale Knights swiftly drove them off, and Peter observed from a safe vantage, letting his men handle the violence. Once the path was clear, they pressed on. Corin Waters watched warily, likely understanding that he was at the mercy of those swords if his demands grew too high. A subtle fear in his eyes told Peter that the man was already questioning his boldness. Upon reaching King's Landing, Peter wasted no time. He ordered quarters be prepared for Corin Waters in a lesser wing of the Red Keep and placed the man under the guardianship of two of his most trusted knights. He then summoned the Master of Whispers, a lean figure named Raven Leicester, who wore a perpetually polite smile. In private, Peter explained the situation. This Corin Waters claims to have evidence that might spark unrest if it fell into the hands of certain lords. We will ensure that evidence never sees the light of day. First, I want you to locate every contact he might have in the city, every courier he might use. Subtly. Then we will extract his documents. Once we have them, we will decide what to do with him. Raven bowed smoothly. Consider it done, Your Grace. Peter nodded, satisfied. Then he moved to the rest of the day's affairs, which, in the swirl of a royal court, never relented. Before sundown, he had met with a delegation from White Harbor seeking better shipping terms, entertained a Braavosi envoy requesting an audience to discuss expansions of the Iron Bank's presence, and addressed an incident in the Dragon Pit district where a minor riot had broken out over the price of bread. All in a day's work for a monarch whose power revolved around the interplay of coin and cunning. Meanwhile, Corin Waters settled into his modest rooms. Guards stood outside at all hours. Servants visited 3 times a day to bring meals. Peter allowed him limited freedom to walk within certain corridors of the Red Keep, always under escort. The blackmailer likely knew he was a prisoner in all but name, yet he had no choice but to feign compliance if he wished to remain alive. Over the next few weeks, Peter orchestrated a slow tightening of the net. Raven Leicester's little birds discovered a small group of men in the city who had contact with Corinne. One was a ragged ex-mercenary from the Stormlands. Another was a Braavosi scribe. Yet another was a washerwoman who worked at the Red Keep itself. Raven's agents quietly intercepted any messages, forging replacements if needed. Slowly, they pieced together the shape of Corinne's supposed evidence. A handful of partial letters from Lisa Arryn's private diaries, referencing half-mad rants about how Peter manipulated her into poisoning her husband, Jon Arryn, and inciting the War of the Five Kings. Snippets that, taken alone, might not be fully damning, but enough to raise suspicions about Peter's involvement in that deadly chain of events. There were also references to Ned Stark's downfall, veiled remarks about who betrayed him at the critical moment. Though none of these scraps were absolute proof on their own, in the hands of the right conspirators, they could stoke the embers of rebellion. When the existence and location of these diaries finally became known, Peter was quick to act. Raven's men traced them to a hidden compartment in a dilapidated building near the Gate of the Gods. In the dead of night, the men retrieved them. Peter himself examined the documents by lamplight in his private study. They reeked of the paranoid scribblings of a woman undone by grief and love, but in their lines could be gleaned references to Peter's urging her to poison John Aaron, the beginnings of that entire war. That and subtle admissions of her own jealousy regarding Kat and Sansa. It was an unsettling read, a testament to how unhinged Lisa had been. He took note of each potential detail that a canny reader might piece together. He burned them all. After making sure no copies existed, he watched as the parchment crumbled to ash in a brazier. The heat of the flames danced across his eyes. When the last scrap curled into black, he exhaled slowly. That particular thread of the past was severed. With those diaries gone, Corinne Wate. RS's leverage stood on shakier ground. But Peter would not strike immediately. He wanted to be certain. He allowed another week to pass, letting Corinne believe the documents were still hidden away, letting Raven's men confirm that no duplicates remained. In that week, Peter went about his normal kingly duties, wearing his usual expression of polite calculation. When the time came, he summoned Corinne Waters to his private solar. The room was small, meant for intimate meetings, its walls lined with shelves of ledgers. A single window overlooked the bay. Peter sat behind a desk, a goblet of wine in his hand. Corinne entered, escorted by 2 guards who remained outside once the door closed. Peter beckoned the man closer. "Master Waters," Peter greeted mildly. "I trust you're finding your accommodations sufficient?" Corinne dipped his head. He looked thinner, a bit pale. "They suffice. My lord, your grace, I wonder when we might formalize my position. I've cooperated in every way so far." Peter studied him a moment, then stood and circled the desk. He moved with unhurried grace, letting the tension build. "Indeed, you have. But we must finalize our understanding. I have a question for you. How sure are you that your hidden evidence is safe?" Corinne started to answer, but Peter's voice overrode him. "Allow me to be direct. It's gone." Corinne's expression froze. His eyes flickered with alarm. "Gone? That's not possible." Peter lifted the goblet to his lips, sipped, and lowered it, eyes steady on Corinne. "My agents intercepted the diaries, your letters, all of it. They're ash now. As for your friends, they have been encouraged to reconsider their loyalty." Corinne's face paled further. You said he stammered, at a loss for words. Peter offered a faint smile. "Yes, I allowed you to believe you had leverage. In truth, I wanted to see the extent of your network, who else might be blackmailing me or waiting to share your secrets. As it turns out, there are none left who can do you much good. I've been thorough. Now, I have a choice. I can let you live under my thumb, or I can have you quietly disposed of. What should I do with you, I wonder?" Panic flared in Corinne's eyes. He took a step back, glancing at the closed door. He must have realized the futility of running. I had no choice," he muttered. "I needed to survive. I only did what I did because I was desperate." Peter nodded, tone deceptively gentle. "Desperation can lead men to ill-advised gambles. But I'd like to know, did you act alone, or are there others behind you urging you to threaten me?" Corinne swallowed hard, words tumbling out in a rush. "No one else. The men I corresponded with are cutthroats and scribes, nothing more. No lord or lady put me up to this." Peter watched him carefully. He suspected Corinne spoke the truth. He had no reason to lie now that his leverage was gone. "I believe you. And I am not entirely without mercy. I did promise you a modest station if you cooperated, didn't I?" Corinne's face lit with a faint, desperate hope. "Yes, you did." Peter gave a small, calculated nod. "Then here is your new station. You will be placed on a ship bound for the port of Lannisport. There you'll serve as an underclerk in the Royal Customs House. You'll be kept under watch, but you'll have a bed, a wage, and a chance to live out your days in peace if you don't try anything foolish again. Refuse, and I'll have you rot in the dungeons. Or worse." Corinne let out a ragged breath. "I accept. Thank you." His eyes flickered with relief, though it was the relief of a man who had narrowly avoided a noose. Peter waved a hand in dismissal. "We'll have you escorted to the docks in the morning. You leave on the first tide. Make no mistake, you are still my prisoner. But you have a chance to be more if you prove you can be trusted. That starts by leaving King's Landing without complaint." Corinne nodded fervently. "I won't cause trouble. Truly, I thank you." Peter smiled thinly. "Go. The guards will see you out. Safe travels, Master Waters." After the door closed, Peter stared at the space where the man had stood. He felt no particular triumph. This was merely the final step in dealing with a trivial blackmail attempt. The diaries were ash, and any who might have used them as a rallying point were exposed. Another loose end tied off. Such was the shape of rule, endless knots that required cutting. Over the following days, he received word that Corinne had indeed sailed west under heavy guard and was placed in a comfortable but guarded position in Lannisport, far from the center of power. Peter instructed his men to keep watch for any sign that Corinne tried to contact new allies. If he did, the punishment would be swift. In that sense, the affair served as a reminder that the ghosts of the past never entirely vanished. The best one could do was bury them deeper, burn their remnants, and pave over the ashes with new foundations. Peter thought of this as he returned to the daily routine of governance. He had more pressing matters at hand, finalizing the Iron Bank's new terms, preparing for an impending harvest festival, and monitoring the quiet tensions among certain storm lords who disliked the authority of King's Landing. But it was a lesson learned. He would never be fully free of the steps he had taken to reach the throne. Nonetheless, the years ahead continued in a relatively stable pattern. Little by little, the once disparate regions of the Seven Kingdoms seemed to align under Baelish rule, albeit with some friction. Yet friction was manageable. He observed the occasional dust-ups, a small rebellion here, a minor dispute there, a lord who complained about the crown's taxes. Each was addressed through a combination of intimidation, diplomacy, or cunning deals. He recognized that a single display of overwhelming force might quell multiple embers at once, so from time to time he allowed the royal army, small but well-trained and well-paid, to make examples of rebellious holdfasts. Word spread quickly. The king's justice, though rarely invoked, was decisive when it fell. Meanwhile, the next generation of Baelish children came of age. The crown prince, slender and sharp-eyed like his father, displayed a decent flair for negotiation. Peter made sure to involve him in small council sessions, letting him sit quietly and observe. Occasionally, the prince would ask thoughtful questions about trade, alliances, or the role of the city watch. Peter encouraged him, hoping to cultivate a successor who understood the delicate interplay of power. The second son, a bit more hot-blooded, took pride in his martial talents, occasionally squiring for notable knights. Peter allowed it, trusting that even a more martial child could be shaped to serve the family's broader aims. The daughter continued her intellectual pursuits, forging friendships at the Citadel and occasionally traveling to King's Landing to share her findings. She had a keen mind for engineering and mathematics, which Peter saw as an asset. Let her learn. Let her advise future projects that might improve the realm's infrastructure. As the family grew, so did House Baelish's sense of legitimacy. Once ridiculed as an upstart bannerless name from the Fingers, it now possessed a lineage that encompassed Dornish blood, a hold on the Vale, and alliances with prominent families. Peter nurtured these alliances carefully, sometimes hosting lavish feasts to show generosity, sometimes delivering stern lectures to remind any guests who the true authority was. Throughout these developments, the Queen gracefully managed her role, presiding over royal ceremonies, championing charitable works, and visiting orphanages or septs where her presence stirred loyalty. She was a soft complement to Peter's flint-edged rule, and the realm, ironically, seemed to find comfort in the notion that the king had a queen who might whisper gentler counsels in his ear. Whether or not Peter heeded them was another matter. Beyond the horizon, a new swirl of events began to coalesce. Reports trickled in of the Golden Company, long the best-known band of sellswords, potentially supporting a claimant with Targaryen blood. The rumor was vague, the figure uncertain, but it was enough to stir petty courts in Essos. Peter read the dispatches with a faint twitch of impatience. A Targaryen threat was always rumored but had never truly materialized since Daenerys vanished from the known world. Yet if the Golden Company got involved, some ambitious lords in Westeros might see an opportunity to break away from Baelish's hold. The king did not want that seed to take root. He sent discreet envoys to the Golden Company's current commander, offering them a contract of their own if they'd prefer the surety of the Iron Throne's gold rather than a nebulous Targaryen promise. He also reached out to the magisters of Pentos and Volantis, forging trade deals that made them think twice about supporting any foolhardy invasion. The word from across the sea was that most Eastern powers found the Dragon Dreams a tired song. They cared more about coin. Peter was confident that if a new Targaryen or pretender materialized, he could outbid them. Or, failing that, greet them with sharpened steel. The realm had known too many wars. If a foreign threat emerged, even lords who disliked Baelish might prefer the stability he offered over the chaos of another conflict. Not all perils came from across the sea. The north, though quiet, remained a land of proud traditions and underlying resentment. Peter recalled the fiasco of the would-be rebellion early in his reign. He suspected some northern lords had never forgiven him for the fates of Ned Stark and the chaos inflicted on the Stark family. Still, his system of alliances there was robust enough to quell open defiance. Winterfell had eventually passed to a distant Stark cousin who owed his position to Baelish's recognition. Peter quietly funded the rebuilding of the Winterfell keep, ensuring the new Stark would not bite the hand that fed him. The North was seldom content, but it was placated. Amid these regional dynamics, Peter fostered an environment that seemed to outsiders almost calm. The average farmer knew little of the secret arrests, the bribes, the hush money, and the manipulations that shaped the king's policies. Instead, they saw roads maintained, bandits largely kept at bay, and taxes that, while never light, were at least stable and predictable. Merchants found the crown's tariffs reasonable enough, especially if they curried favor with the master of coin. Artisans found patrons in the capital thanks to the queen's encouragement of culture. Compared to the horrors of the previous decades, the War of the Five Kings, the destruction wrought by dragons or by rampaging armies, this was a more bearable rule. And so the realm continued day by day, content enough not to risk everything for an uncertain revolt. But the Game of Thrones never fully rests. An undercurrent of tension always runs beneath the surface. Peter often stood on a balcony overlooking the city, scanning the horizon. He had come so far, and yet the sense of precarious balance never left him. There were too many factors to account for: old rivalries, new allegiances, shifting tides in Essos, and the unpredictable nature of the realm's greatest houses. On nights when he allowed himself a second goblet of wine, he might recall the younger man he had been, dreaming of greatness in a world that scorned him. That younger Peter could never have imagined the weight of carrying a crown, yet he had pursued it unrelentingly. Now he had it, and with it, 1,000 new concerns. Time carved new wrinkles in his brow, peppered his hair with silver. Yet he retained a certain energy, a subtle vigor that came from the mental thrill of controlling the realm's destiny. Every morning, he rose to face fresh intrigues. Every evening, he retired having quelled or diverted them. And so it went, in a steady march of years that saw House Baelish move from a novelty to an establishment. The children grew older, stepping into roles of their own. The Crown Prince took on more duties in the capital, presiding over minor disputes, studying how to manage the city watch, and forging friendships or rivalries with lords around his age. He seemed a milder version of his father, polite and methodical, without quite the same hidden blade. Peter watched him carefully. He sometimes worried the boy lacked a touch of ruthlessness that the seat of power demanded. But perhaps that would come with experience. The second son gained renown as a juster, traveling occasionally to tourneys where he wore the green and silver of House Baelish. He won enough matches to be spoken of as a contender, but not so many that he overshadowed older knights. In the realm of martial prestige, it was a comfortable place, and Peter encouraged him to remain hungry but not reckless. The princess, older now, returned from Old Town with a small retinue of maesters who admired her intellect. She occasionally assisted with the realm's engineering projects, such as improving aqueducts in the Crownlands or developing a more efficient design for grain mills. Peter smiled at her earnest approach. If she married into a strategic house one day, she would bring not just a royal name but a formidable mind. In tandem with these family developments, the Crown's finances continued to improve. The Iron Bank, having found Baelish a reliable partner, extended lines of credit at favorable terms. Trade with Essos flourished, with King's Landing acting as a central hub for distributing goods across Westeros. Peter's master of coin orchestrated the construction of additional granaries to stabilize bread prices, a move that placated the small folk. The city watch was expanded to 10,000 men, all carefully vetted for loyalty and well compensated. A contented watch was less likely to be swayed by bribes. Peter also sanctioned a modest expansion of the royal fleet, building new warships that patrolled the narrow sea, discouraging pirates and protecting merchant galleys. Each piece fit into a broader puzzle, a realm whose security allowed trade, whose trade funded more security, and whose cycle of prosperity kept rebellion at bay. That did not mean life under King Baelish was a paradise. Many lords still whispered that the crown's hand was too heavy in their affairs. Others felt stifled by the watchful presence of the king's spies. But their grievances rarely blossomed into open defiance. The memory of past chaos lingered, and Peter skillfully pitted rival houses against each other whenever they grew too cozy. By ensuring that no single block of lords could unite to challenge him, he maintained a delicate equilibrium. From time to time, Peter traveled the realm, sometimes with the queen, sometimes alone, incognito. He visited the north, paying his respects to the new Lord Stark at Winterfell, strolling the snowy courtyards with a thoughtful expression. He visited the Eyrie, looking down upon the Vale from those lofty heights, remembering how Lysa's demise had paved his way. He ventured to the Reach where golden fields of wheat reminded him how critical it was to keep House Tyrell's successors, now a web of smaller houses, pliant. He even journeyed to Dorne where his marriage ties gave him a warmer welcome than most kings of the past. Each progress served to remind him of the kingdom's vastness and its varied peoples. Each also served to remind the local lords that their monarch was no distant figure but a man of flesh and blood who kept track of them. By never allowing his presence to fade into a rumor, he ensured no region felt entirely free of the crown's gaze. As the decades inched forward, some who had witnessed the War of the Five Kings passed on. A new generation, born after that devastating conflict, knew only the rule of House Baelish. For them, the notion that the king was once a mere master of coin might seem like an old tale, barely believable, half-legend. The children of the small folk grew up without the constant dread of roving armies. They heard rumors of the king's cunning, the hush around his name, the sense that he saw everything. Some might even have admired him for it if it meant they could grow up without losing their homes to warlords. The deeper complexities of how that peace was maintained rarely concerned them. Survival and relative prosperity were enough. In these middle years of his reign, Peter often reflected on the notion of legacy. He had never been one for the vanity of monuments, but there was a part of him that considered how future histories would record his monarchy. Would they call him a tyrant of whispers or a wise king who ended the worst of the violence? He supposed it mattered less than ensuring the dynasty endured. Let them call him cunning, manipulative, or even cruel if they wished, so long as House Baelish remained on the throne. Historians often painted in broad strokes, and Peter knew history was another game to be manipulated by the victor. Yet, for all his precaution, no man could anticipate every storm. The day finally came when an unexpected threat arrived not from a rebellious lord or a foreign claimant but from beyond the familiar realms. A cold wind blew from the far north, bringing with it disturbing rumors. The Night's Watch, now a mere skeleton of its former self, sent a raven to King's Landing, carried by a half-frozen ranger who had ridden tirelessly for weeks. His message was dire: scattered sightings of undead remnants roving in the wilderness north of the wall, possibly slipping through collapsed sections of the ancient fortification. The watch was too undermanned to patrol effectively, their pleas for help having fallen on deaf ears for years. Now, they insisted the threat might escalate. This talk of the undead was reminiscent of old stories from the Age of Heroes. Most had dismissed them as fables: White Walkers, Whites, the Long Night. The War of the Five Kings had overshadowed any real confrontation with such supernatural threats. But the message was there, plain in the ranger's trembling hand. An enemy that defied conventional logic was stirring. Peter read the scroll in the presence of the small council. A hush fell over them. It felt like confronting a child's nightmare, impossible, laughable, but also deeply unsettling if there was any truth behind it. The Lord Commander of the King's Guard, now an older but seasoned knight, cleared his throat. "Your Grace, the watch has cried wolf before, have they not? We've heard rumors of wildling raids of scattered whites. None have come to pass in any significant way." The Master of Whispers, Raven, pursed his lips. "True, but the northern reports do contain repeated references to unnatural events. Could be an exaggeration, or it could be that the threat is real, even if smaller in scale than legend claims." Peter's eyes flicked to the Master of Coin. "If we were to send an expedition, some knights, some supplies, what might it cost the treasury?" The Master of Coin hesitated. "We have enough surplus to fund a modest force for a season or two if necessary. But an extended campaign in the far north would drain resources, especially if we suspect no real danger." Peter let out a measured breath. He did not want to be the fool who neglected a genuine threat. Nor did he want to look weak by dancing to the tune of an old wives' tale. He recalled how certain rumors in the past had proven illusions. Daenerys Targaryen's attempted conquest never came. The rumored return of White Walkers had fizzled into little more than scattered sightings. But ignoring the watch entirely might let a spark ignite into a wildfire of panic. He was also aware that House Stark had always placed importance on the old warnings. If he dismissed the threat and then something happened, the North could claim that Baelish's arrogance doomed them. That might spur rebellion. Alternatively, if he acted, he risked pouring gold into a barren cause. A compromise was in order. Peter spoke in a controlled tone. "We shall dispatch a small royal contingent to the wall, 50 knights, perhaps some archers, along with a few engineers. They'll assess the state of the wall, reinforce any breaches, and gather intelligence. I will also send my second son to lead them, ensuring that the mission is taken seriously. That will appease the Night's Watch and let the North see that we do not ignore their concerns. At the same time, it won't bankrupt us nor leave us vulnerable here." If it turns out to be a false alarm, we lose little. If it's real, we will have advanced warning. The council nodded in agreement. They finalized details, drafted orders, and prepared a store of supplies to be transported by ship to White Harbor, then north to the Wall. Peter's second son, who had yearned for a chance to prove himself in martial matters, was excited by the prospect of a real command. Peter took him aside before he departed. Do not underestimate the North. The climate alone can kill. Keep your men disciplined, gather accurate reports, and don't be swayed by tall tales. If the watch is incompetent, you must do what you can to assess and bolster their defenses. The crown's image depends on you. The young man, near 20, nodded fiercely, eyes shining with pride. I'll serve well, father. A week later, the expedition set forth, leaving King's Landing by ship. Peter received updates via Raven at the major stops, White Harbor, Winterfell, then Castle Black. The journey was relatively uneventful until they reached the frozen outskirts near the Wall. The young Baelish wrote of how the Night's Watch numbers had dwindled to fewer than 300. Many castles along the Wall were empty, the gates unmanned. Snowdrifts choked the abandoned passageways. The climate was harsh, and morale among the black-clad men was low, with supplies sparse. Still, no sign of an immediate undead horde had surfaced. Peter read these letters, feeling relief that the threat seemed minimal. Perhaps it was just another spasm of wildling activity, or a few stray wights that roamed beyond the normal range. Yet a month later, a more alarming raven arrived. His son reported that a scouting party of Night's Watch Rangers had vanished, leaving only bloody footprints in the snow. One survivor stumbled back to Castle Black, incoherent with terror, claiming that walking corpses ambushed them at dusk. The man's frostbitten state made him delirious, so it was impossible to glean coherent details. But the men of the watch were spooked, and so were the 50 knights who accompanied the crown prince's brother. Peter's second son wrote, "We can find no living foe. We track strange footprints that end abruptly, as if the creatures melted away or returned beneath the ice. Supplies are stretched, and the cold is relentless. I will remain cautious and continue searching. I do not wish to commit all our forces to chasing phantoms in the snow. Still, I cannot deny the ranger's fear." Peter felt a curl of unease. He had rarely allowed superstition to enter his calculations. But the possibility of a genuine supernatural threat unsettled him. In council, he proposed reinforcing the expedition. Lord Estermont frowned. "Your Grace, if the second son claims these creatures vanish into the night, perhaps the men chase illusions. The North is full of old stories that turn wolves into shadow demons. I suspect this is a wildling trick. We'd be better served hunting the wildlings thoroughly." The Queen ventured a rare interjection. "Should we not take precaution? If there is any truth to it, ignoring it could be dire. Let us send more men for safety. The realm can spare another 50 knights, can it not?" Peter hesitated. The Queen's words aligned with his cautious side, yet overcommitting resources would raise eyebrows among lords who believed the threat imaginary. He made a decision. Yes, dispatch another contingent of 100 men, plus supplies, to Eastwatch by the sea. They'll march west along the Wall to meet my son's party. The sea route will likely be faster. Let them confirm the situation. We will not show fear, but neither will we ignore the pleas from our own blood. Thus it was done. More men sailed north, carrying warm clothing, dragonglass arrowheads rumored in old lore to be effective against the undead. Peter had gleaned that tidbit from half-forgotten scrolls. He was not sure if such myths held truth, but it cost little to try. The months that followed brought contradictory tidings. Some letters indicated no sightings, that the watch was settling back into routine. Others mentioned fleeting glimpses of pale shapes at night, the unnatural quiet of northern forests, and occasional missing rangers. Peter felt a creeping frustration. There was no definitive proof of a massive threat, yet the pattern of unexplained disappearances and unnerved scouts persisted. At court, some joked that the king's son was chasing ghosts. Others whispered that perhaps there was indeed something stirring in the far north, something the realm had dismissed too easily. Peter tried to remain measured. If an actual invasion of undead threatened, that might unify the 7 kingdoms under his banner, assuming they believed him and responded. Alternatively, it could tear the realm apart if the threat proved unstoppable. He had spent his entire life mastering politics, not supernatural warfare. He continued his daily tasks, quietly gathering dragon glass from Dragonstone and storing it in King's Landing, just in case. He also invited a few old maesters from the citadel to the capital, instructing them to search the archives for references to the Long Night, the others anything that might shed light on how the first men once battled them. These measures remained secret, disclosed only to a few trusted advisors. He did not wish to cause panic, nor did he want to appear credulous if the threat never materialized. He had built his rule on pragmatism, and this was the strangest test of all. That winter was harsher than usual. The north froze early, and even the riverlands saw snow by mid-autumn. Shipments of grain from the Reach still arrived, but sometimes with delays due to storms. Peter monitored the capital's granaries, ensuring there would be no famine in King's Landing. He raised new levies for the city watch, mindful that if times grew desperate, the people might riot. Yet the city remained calm enough. The greatest concern was the intangible sense that something was amiss. Even in the south, the nights seemed longer. The stars seemed dim. Superstition crept into the talk of servants and guards. Peter disliked intangible threats. He preferred enemies he could bribe or outmaneuver. Into this atmosphere of unease arrived a messenger from the north, exhausted and near collapse, carrying a sealed letter from Peter's second son. He had made a perilous journey across the frosty wilderness, evading weird sightings and storms. Peter read the letter in private, heart-pounding, for it was more explicit than any prior report. "Father, the threat is real. We have encountered whites, dead men moving under a pale glow. They are few, but horrifying. Steel kills them only if you hack them to pieces. Fire is more effective. Dragonglass appears to wound them in a permanent way. The men are frightened, but we have held our ground at the Shadow Tower, supported by the Night's Watch. Scouts say more are stirring in the far north. Wildlings flee south, speaking of White Walkers leading the dead. Some watchers on the Ice Bay claim a group of them approached the coast, perhaps seeking a path around the wall. I beg you to send more reinforcements. The Watch alone cannot handle this. If even half the wildling rumors are true, a great host of dead could march upon the living. Prepare the realm." Peter reread the lines, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. His own son, typically level-headed and even a bit brash, would not embellish such horrors without cause. For a moment, Peter questioned everything he had worked for. What use was cunning and political strategy against an army of the dead? If legends were to be believed, the others had been vanquished only by the unity of men, the children of the forest, and perhaps the assistance of dragons or some unknown magic. The Seven Kingdoms were not prepared for such a conflict, especially after so many had become complacent. Yet ignoring it could be fatal. That night, he convened an urgent council session, drawing in the Lord Commander of the King Guard, the Master of Whispers, the Master of Laws, the Master of Coin, and a few key lords present in King's Landing. He read parts of the letter aloud. Some scoffed, but others turned pale. He placed the charred remains of a white's hand on the table, sent south in a sealed chest, still writhing when first discovered, though now inert in the warmer climate. The sight silenced the room. The smell of decay hung in the air. One older knight whispered a half-forgotten oath, crossing himself. Another demanded they burn the thing at once. Peter let the tension boil, then spoke in a crisp tone. "We face a threat that defies reason, but we cannot dismiss it. My son has no motive to fabricate such horrors. We must muster a significant force and fortify the wall. If these undead truly come in large numbers, we will need every sword and every scrap of dragonglass we can find. I will need your support, gold, men, supplies. We must rally the realm." A stunned silence followed. Then the Master of Laws cleared his throat. "Your Grace, how do we proceed? Summon the great lords for a council of war?" Peter nodded. "Yes. Send ravens to every major lord and bannerman, summoning them to a grand council at Harrenhal, given its central location. We will discuss immediate measures. Tell them the king has discovered an incursion in the far north that threatens all mankind. Emphasize we are not calling them to war among ourselves, but to defend the realm. Should any refuse, we will deal with them once this threat is resolved." The Master of Whispers added, "You risk them believing this a trick, your grace, some ruse to gather armies under your control." Peter exhaled. "I know. But we can't do this alone. If we do nothing, an undead horde might spill south, unstoppable by local garrisons. At least at Harrenhal, I can present proof." He glanced at the rotted hand. "We will bring a white, if possible, or something that cannot be mistaken for a lie. Lords who see it will have no choice but to ally with us." The council voiced agreement, though fear underlaid it. They dispersed to carry out his orders, and Peter stood alone in the chamber, tension thrumming in his veins. All his life, he had dealt with mortal ambition, greed, pride, vulnerabilities he could exploit. Now he faced an enemy that did not bend, bribe, or speak. The dead would keep marching, unaffected by illusions and deals. If he was to protect his realm, his legacy, he needed a new kind of strategy. Over the next month, messages flew across the 7 kingdoms. Lords responded with varying degrees of skepticism. Some readily agreed to attend, trusting that a threat so dire would not be fabricated. Others demanded more proof, suspecting a ploy to strip them of autonomy. A few outright refused, claiming they had no time for the king's illusions. Peter took note of the refusals. He would remember those names if the undead threat was vanquished. He arranged for the meeting at Harrenhal to occur in late spring, when travel was easiest for lords from distant regions. Meanwhile, he dispatched more men to the north, shipping dragonglass, pitch, and supplies for building fires. He authorized the forging of new scorpion-like devices that could hurl flaming projectiles, hoping they might be used against the whites. His realm's blacksmiths worked tirelessly on new arrowheads, spears, and any contraption that might help. The city hummed with an undercurrent of dread as word of this northern menace began to seep into the streets. Some doubted, some believed, but all sensed the king was preparing for something big. The queen supported his efforts, stepping out among the people to reassure them that the crown was acting to protect the realm. She encouraged donations to the watch, appealing to piety and unity in the face of an unholy threat. The faith, after initial skepticism, found purpose in declaring the undead an abomination that must be destroyed. Even the High Septon grew enthusiastic about rallying the faithful to defend the living. Peter observed how swiftly fear could galvanize men. Perhaps that was the silver lining. A unified Westeros was less likely to slip into petty squabbles. As spring dawned, contingents of lords began to arrive at Harrenhal. Long lines of knights, bannermen, and servants filled the ruined courtyard. Peter had arranged for the best chambers to be refurbished, anticipating the presence of so many. He arrived in regal splendor, the queen at his side, the crown prince and their daughter behind them, along with the king's guard. Banners of green and silver snapped in the wind. Lords from the Reach, the Westerlands, the Vale, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, and Dorne poured in. Even the North sent a sizable delegation led by the new Stark, who arrived with grim faces. Rumors claimed they had seen the Whites firsthand. On the first day of the council, Peter took his seat in the old throne room of Harrenhal, an imposing hall overshadowed by high arches and black stone. He wore the crown of slender Valyrian steel, signifying his station. Lords milled about, talking in low tones, suspicious or anxious. The meeting began with polite formalities, but quickly turned to the main issue. Peter took the floor, speaking with clear authority. My lords, we have assembled here because I have received undeniable evidence of a threat that transcends any of our old quarrels. In the far north, beyond the wall, the dead walk. Scouts from the Night's Watch, along with my own men, have encountered whites and white walkers. I would not have believed it had I not seen proof myself. He gestured, and 2 guards dragged in a heavy chest. Inside, a dismembered white's arm still twitched, preserved by the cold. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the lords. Some tried to dismiss it as a parlor trick, but the hand's fingers moved of their own accord, scraping at the chest's interior. A hush fell. The northern lords stepped forward, confirming they had fought such creatures, that steel alone was insufficient. Dragonglass or fire was needed. A hush of horror swept the room. Even the doubters turned pale. Peter continued, if these creatures gather in great number, they could sweep across our lands. Walls and moats will not stop them. We must unite, providing men, supplies, and fortifications at the wall. Only by standing together can we prevent a new long night. A voice emerged from the crowd, the new Lord Lannister, stern-faced. And what if this is a trick to gather our armies under your command so you might strengthen your hold over the realm? Peter regarded him coolly. You think I would conjure the dead to enforce my rule? If you wish to see for yourself, ride north with your men. Witness these abominations firsthand. But if you wait until they march on your lands, it may be too late. A Dornish lord spoke up, I've heard the Night's Watch is half dead as it is, lacking men. Why not let the wildlings handle it? They live up there. One of the Stark banner men bristled. The wildlings are also fleeing the dead. If you turn them away, you only swell the army of the dead when they fall. Peter let the arguments flow for a moment. Then he raised a hand for silence. My lords, we can bicker, or we can prepare. I propose this course. Each major region commits a quota of soldiers to the Night's Watch, not just criminals or cast-offs, but trained men. We fortify the abandoned castles along the wall. We stockpile dragonglass and other weapons. Meanwhile, we send scouting parties beyond the wall with rangers and experienced knights to learn the enemy's movements. If they are few, we can contain them. If they are many, we call for a mass levy. Do this, and I vow not to use those soldiers against any house. They will be stationed strictly in the north." The hall buzzed with debate. Some lords resented giving up manpower. Others feared that if they didn't comply, they might be branded traitors in the face of an existential threat. Eventually, consensus formed around the idea that an immediate defense was needed, though some demanded assurances. Peter, skilled in negotiation, offered to formalize these assurances in writing, witnessed by the High Septon, binding him not to divert these forces for personal gain. The High Septon, present at the council, took the role seriously, anointing the agreement with holy oils. After hours of tense discussion, the lords agreed. A great host would muster in the north by late summer, tasked with reinforcing the wall. Scouts would push beyond it to gauge the threat. If the situation was dire, more men would follow. The next question was leadership. Who would command this grand force? Peter was the king, yet many lords bristled at the idea of him seizing total control of an army that encompassed all regions. Others insisted that the north was the natural choice, being closest to the threat. The new Lord Stark, honorable though he was, lacked the experience of waging a large-scale war. Some lords proposed a coalition of generals, but that risked confusion. Peter recognized the delicacy. He needed the realm to unite behind a single figure, or at most a small council of war. Yet if it were all Baelish men, the lords would protest. If it were only northern men, the rest might feel no ownership in the struggle. He offered a measured solution. "I shall appoint a council of 3 to oversee the battle plans. One representative from the crown, my second son, who has already fought these whites. One from the north, Lord Stark himself, and one from the Reach or the Westerlands to represent the southern armies. They will rotate command, guided by the Watch's knowledge of the land. Together, they will choose when and how to engage." A compromise that, while imperfect, seemed acceptable to the majority. The lord chosen from the southern houses ended up being Lord Tarley, known for his discipline and stern leadership. Stark seemed satisfied that his voice would be heard. The assembly grudgingly accepted. The seeds of a united front, albeit fragile, were planted. As the council concluded, ravens soared in all directions, carrying news of the accord. Armies began to mobilize. The crown poured resources into forging dragonglass weapons, setting up supply lines, and constructing more scorpions. House Lannister contributed gold. House Tarley promised troops. The North readied its bannermen. The Vale Knights stood ready to ride. Even the Iron Islands, seeing an opportunity to prove their worth, offered a small fleet to patrol for any undead crossing by sea. The largest coordinated effort since the Targaryen conquest slowly took shape. And at the center of it all stood Peter Baelish, orchestrating from the shadows as much as from the dais. He had never intended to be a war king, let alone one facing an enemy out of legend. Yet his cunning had gained him the throne, and now it would be tested in a struggle that would determine the fate of every living soul in Westeros. Peter directed the realm's energies with a calm efficiency that left little room for hesitation. Spies reported on troop movements, making sure no house used this chance to slip out of line. The Queen organized shipments of grain and supplies, while Peter's daughter worked with engineers to design better fortifications. The realm braced itself. As late summer approached, the grand host began gathering in the north. Thousands of knights, men-at-arms, archers, and support staff massed at Moat Cailin and Winterfell, then moved toward the wall. Tension rode with them. Some believed they would face a dire foe, others dismissed it as overblown panic. But the chilling air and eerie stories from rangers cast a spell of dread. Peter remained in the south at first, ensuring the capital stayed secure and that no opportunistic rebellion sparked. He sent the Crown Prince north to observe and learn, while the second son retained battlefield command. At times, Peter considered traveling north himself, but he recognized that the realm needed its king to maintain overall stability. If the White Walkers truly attacked, he would go if necessary, but for now it was enough to direct from the heart of the kingdom. Ravens brought news of preliminary skirmishes. The watchers on the wall saw small clusters of undead at night, testing defenses. Arrows tipped in dragonglass proved effective. A few patrols encountered White Walkers, tall and silent, wielding blades of ice that shattered ordinary steel. Some men panicked, others held firm. Losses were minimal so far, but the sense of an imminent onslaught grew. Wildlings trickled in, battered and frightened, some acknowledging the king in the south for the first time in their lives. They told tales of entire villages lost, of monstrous shapes moving through the forests. The living line of defense braced itself along the wall, fires burning day and night. Scouts ventured beyond, returning with glimpses of a massive, slowly assembling horde. The Great War of the Dead threatened to begin. Peter poured more resources into the war effort, sending hundreds more men, ensuring supply lines were strong. Across the realm, blacksmiths toiled, farmers harvested at breakneck pace, and local leaders preached unity against the undead. In King's Landing, the Red Keep bustled with officials managing logistics. If the front lines failed, the realm would face horrors it had not seen in eons. Amid the chaos, Peter still navigated political mines. Some lords tried to renegotiate old grievances, leveraging their support for better titles. Peter dispensed minor concessions but held firm on major points, reminding them that survival took precedence. Others spread rumors that the undead threat was fabricated or exaggerated to keep the lords under Peter's control. Yet those rumors rang hollow as more first-hand accounts poured in. Peter skillfully used each new piece of evidence to rally more support, telling the realm, "We stand together, or we die together." So the stage was set for a confrontation beyond mortal politics, with Peter Baelish at the helm of the Seven Kingdoms, orchestrating an alliance that would have seemed impossible under other circumstances. Even as fear gnawed at the edges of his mind, he recognized an opportunity within the crisis. If he led Westeros through this threat, he would be lauded as the savior king who repelled the Long Night. His dynasty's legitimacy would be forever cemented. And if he failed, none would be left to whisper about his failings. One way or another, the game would reach its highest stakes. In the final days before the snows closed the northern roads entirely, Peter made the decision to travel north himself. He left the Queen to govern King's Landing, flanked by a loyal council, and took a smaller escort, mostly Vale Knights. The journey was arduous, but he pressed on. He wanted to be present for the decisive moment, whether it brought victory or doom. As he rode, his breath steaming in the cold air, he recalled his earliest ambitions. He had once believed that cunning could conquer any obstacle. Now he would see if that cunning could stand against an enemy that did not scheme, but simply marched onward, unstoppable as winter itself. Beyond the line of the horizon, in that icy twilight, the forces of the living prepared to meet the dead. At the heart of that living force stood the House Baelish standard, green mockingbird on silver, fluttering defiantly in a wind that smelled of ice and dread. And Peter Baelish, who had once been mocked as Littlefinger, rode at the head of his knights, prepared to match wits with a horror older than any crown. This was the final test for the king who had climbed chaos itself to seize power. Now chaos wore a new face, white and cold, and Peter intended to meet it without flinching. How he fared in that confrontation would determine not just the fate of his legacy, but the fate of every breathing soul in the Seven Kingdoms.